Well, a trial begins today for a man who calls himself Splitting the Sky. He was arrested a year ago in Calgary for attempting to make a citizen's arrest on former President George W. Bush. Since that time, he has been hailed by academics and professionals alike. And today we have one man here to talk about the trial, the implications, and more. Now, I spoke with him earlier, Professor Michel Chossudovsky, who supports Splitting the Sky, and here's what he had to say.
Canadian law is very explicit on this matter. There is what is called the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, and people who enter Canada, if they are an alleged war criminal or terrorist, should be barred from Canada. Now, we had a number of, there's a whole history to this, going back to 2004, where a judge in the province of British Columbia actually said we cannot initiate a legal procedure against the sitting head of state and commander-in-chief. However, tacitly, that judge also acknowledged that the allegation of war crimes was legitimate. And so we have several pieces of legislation in Canada which can be used to make a case that, in effect, George W. Bush is a war criminal. He should either be barred from Canada, but the moment he enters Canada, he is subject to Canadian law. And Canadian law is very explicit, because we have a Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act, which applies particularly to George W. Bush. Now, we also support the Nuremberg Protocol, and which means that people who are involved in law enforcement have to abide by these laws, even if they get contrary directives from the Canadian government. So this is an extremely important case, because it tests some very important pieces of Canadian law. And of course, we know that George W. Bush is a war criminal. He can't escape that. He's no longer president. But when he comes to Canada, he can be subject to arrest. And in this particular case, it is a citizen's arrest by Splitting the Sky, which is at stake in this lawsuit. Splitting the Sky actually first confronted the Calgary police and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the so-called Mounties, and said, you do your job. This is a war criminal. Under Canadian law, you have to actually arrest the guy. And then he undertook a citizen's arrest. Now, the whole concept of citizen's arrest is being debated. We are in a situation where heads of state and heads of government commit atrocities. We see what's happening in the U.S. Congress, where it is now possible even to go and assassinate an American citizen overseas, and alleged terrorists, etc., etc. All these are legal acts. So we're dealing with the criminalization of the state. We're dealing with a former head of state who is an alleged war criminal, and consequently, citizens now understand that they must use the law and enforce the law in a way which is consistent, and that these people cannot escape. Ultimately, they cannot escape indictment. And that is the message that Splitting the Sky is giving to us in Canada and around the world. George W. Bush is a war criminal.